Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 19th, 2024. A global IT outage after the company Crowdstrike releases a flawed software update causing havoc with computer systems at airlines, banks, hospitals, businesses, media, and government offices. General C.Q. Brown, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will talk about any harm to the military and the larger issue of cybersecurity and national defense. Utah's Republican Governor Spencer Cox changes his position and endorses Donald Trump for president. Governor Cox saying that after the assassination attempt, he was grateful to hear former President Trump's call for unity and to lower the temperature. President Biden's reelection campaign chair, Jen Dillion O'Malley, says that he is absolutely staying in the race, as now a third Democratic senator, Martin Heinrich of New Mexico, and more Democratic House members are calling on the president to drop out, some saying outright that he cannot beat Donald Trump, and his candidacy risks losing control of the House and Senate to the Republicans. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is convicted by a court in Russia of espionage and sentenced to 16 years in a maximum security prison. We'll get Secretary of State Antony Blinken's reaction. Plus, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan previews Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, D.C. next week, and the first public hearing of the bipartisan Afghanistan War Commission created by Congress to examine what led up to the war and determine lessons learned and recommendations for the way forward. From Associated Press, a global technology outage caused by a faulty software update grounded flights, knocked media outlets offline, and disrupted hospitals, small businesses, and government offices on Friday, highlighting the fragility of a digitized world dependent on just a handful of providers. The trouble with the update issued by cybersecurity firm Crowdstrike affected customers running Microsoft Windows. It was not the result of hacking or a cyber attack, according to Crowdstrike, which apologized and said a fix was on the way. That was from Associated Press. A White House official saying this morning the president has been briefed on the Crowdstrike outage, and his team is in touch with Crowdstrike and impacted entities. His team is engaged across the interagency to get sector-by-sector updates throughout the day and is standing by to provide assistance as needed. General C.Q. Brown, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked about the national security implications in an interview today at the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado, with Fox News chief national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin.
We all know about now the widespread internet outage that was caused by what seems a glitch, not a cyber attack per se. We learned that this morning. How has it affected U.S. military operations? Has it affected the U.S. military?
Well, yeah, as you might imagine, I was made aware of the situation on the airplane flying back here to the United States. For all reports I have right now, no impact on DoD operations. But I will also share with you. I mean, this gives you an indication of, how important cybersecurity, how we use our software, how we use our tools is important, and the things that we do, particularly in DoD, to protect our capabilities to ensure that we can still protect the nation. Even when you have whether it's a glitch or an attack, to be best postured to be able to support.
And should it be a wake-up call for Americans? Many don't realize that if the U.S. were to find itself in a conflict with China, it is largely believed that a cyber attack would hit the homeland in those initial hours. And we see this is just a little taste of what could happen. What do you think Americans should realize from this incident? Well,
we all know how dependent we are all on cyber and the tools that it provides for us just to make our day-to-day lives easier. But when you have something like this should be a reminder to us of why it's important to, from a cybersecurity piece, not only at the governmental level, all the way down to your local homes, to protect ourselves and be best postured. Because I'm sure our adversaries are looking at this as a way to, what I would say, put sand into gears if we're trying to generate combat power to go to respond to a crisis anywhere around the world.
General C.Q. Brown, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Aspen Security Forum at the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado. BreakingDefense.com has an article that reads, though General Brown said DoD operations haven't seen major issues, Crowdstrike does do business with the Pentagon, noting in a 2023 press release that it secures some of the United States' most critical assets within the DoD, defense industrial base entities, Department of Homeland Security through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the Center for Internet Security, and multiple other federal civilian agencies. Crowdstrike CEO was on the NBC Today show this morning about this problem.
And I want to start with saying we're deeply sorry for the impact that we've caused to customers, to travelers, to anyone affected by this, including our companies. So we know what the issue is. We're resolving and have resolved the issue now. It's recovering systems that are out there. And essentially, as you've talked about in the statement I put out, is the system was sent an update, and that update had a software bug in it and caused an issue with the Microsoft operating system. And we identified this very quickly and remediated the issue. And as systems come back online, as they're rebooted, they're coming up and they're working. And now we are working with each and every customer to make sure that we can bring them back online. But that was the extent of the issue in terms of a bug that was related to our update.
Crowdstrike CEO George Kurtz on NBC's Today show. The company says it has about 29,000 customers, including more than 500 on the list of the Fortune 1000. Wall Street today, the Dow down 377, NASDAQ down 144, S&P down 39. Politico writes Utah Governor Spencer Cox was one of the only Republicans holding statewide office who had held out on endorsing former President Donald Trump. Not anymore. Cox, a longtime Trump skeptic who has said he never voted for the former president and called on him to resign following the January 6th attack on the Capitol, on Friday threw his weight behind him. The endorsement came a day after Trump formally accepted the Republican nomination and nearly a week after he survived an assassination attempt during a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday. The day after the shooting, Cox privately threw his support behind Trump in a letter, writing that he believed Trump's life was spared due to a miracle, and that, "I humbly submit to you, and I sincerely mean this, only you can unify the country." Governor Cox held a news conference today in Salt Lake City.
Governor, you had a big change related to President Trump in the last week. Explain that.
Well, so sure. Last Saturday, we had something very tragic that happened in our nation. We had an assassination attempt, something that we haven't seen in my lifetime since I was a little kid. I remember I was in, first grade or something, second grade, when Ronald Reagan was shot. I remember being at home and watching that on TV with my parents. It was a very sobering moment. It's something I've been worried about. It's something I've talked about. In fact, when we had our first convening of the National Governors Association, we had a speaker who talked specifically about political violence in our country. And we've seen an uptick in threats of political violence here at home in the state of Utah. DPS had a report last week that showed that there had been an increase in investigations of threats of political violence. We've certainly had them against me and my family, but to see live an actual assassination attempt that if the former president hadn't turned his head just slightly, would have clearly ended his life. And it was a very sobering moment. I spent the night distraught, worried about our nation and what we've become and who we are. I spent the next day, Sunday, in contemplation, prayed a lot, and felt that I felt that I needed to write a letter to the former president, which I did. It was a personal level letter. I understood it got shared this morning and has been shared around, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I have no problem with people reading that letter. I think it explains very well where my heart is and where my head is right now. I was grateful to see the president say some things that he's never said before. In the moments after that, in the statements that he released, and in parts of his speech last night, the former president talked about the need to lower the temperature and unify our country. I was very heartened by the statement that Melania Trump put out as well. This is something I believe in, you guys. I preach it. I try to live by it. I'm not very good at it. I know that former President Trump isn't very good at it. Hasn't been for a long time. That's been one of my biggest struggles, for sure. and yet there's a willingness to try, and that's all I can ask for and hope for. And so I told him in that letter, I said, if you'll do this, I will do everything I can to help and support you. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm doing everything I can to help and support him. We'll still have lots of disagreements, I'm sure, and we'll still do everything we can to help the state of Utah and to help the Republican Party be successful. I'm a proud conservative. I'm a little different conservative maybe than the party is today. I've always considered myself a Ronald Reagan conservative, and certainly there are some differences between that and the party. And I'm trying to be open and to learn from people who have different ideas within the party. I try to represent the very best of the party. I hope I've done that in the past. I want you to know that nothing has changed. I will continue to do that. And so my support of President Trump is that I'm going to help him be successful. I said several months ago in this very setting that I feel he's going to win Utah, and I feel very confident, more confident now than ever before, that he's going to win the presidential election. Right now, I don't think it's close. Again, I don't know what's going to happen with Democrats. I think something that many have been saying for a long time now. People on the other side are realizing that they have a candidate who can't continue. And so we'll see what happens. But it's right now, it's not really close. Every swing state, Trump is leading, I think, in every swing state. I think he's led in the national polls the entire time, which is very, very different than 4 years ago. So he's going to win. He doesn't need my help to win at all. That's just going to happen. But I do think that I can help and be a voice when it comes to helping to unify our nation, when it comes to helping to lower the temperature and to reduce political violence. And that was my commitment in the letter to him, that I would do that. And so I will follow through on that commitment.
You're endorsing, and you now will vote for the former president. Yeah,
I said in that letter, I will support you, yes, and that's part of supporting. I'll do everything I can to help, and again, my commitment to him was that I would help him try to lower the temperature in this country, and I sincerely hope that from what I've heard from people around him that he is committed to this. That again, this is something that hasn't been high on his list in the past. I think that's probably an understatement, and so I'll work closely with him to help do that.
Will you vote for him?
Yeah.
Governor Spencer Cox, Republican from Utah, at a news conference in Salt Lake City. A couple of articles from the New York Times. The director of the Secret Service, Kimberly A. Cheadle, will appear before lawmakers for the first time on Monday as scrutiny intensifies over the security failures at the Pennsylvania rally where a gunman tried to kill former President Donald J. Trump, the agency announced on Friday. A spokesman for the agency wrote on social media, "The Secret Service is fully accountable for the safety of its protectees. We are committed to better understanding what happened before, during, and after the assassination attempt of former President Trump to ensure it never happens again." And hundreds of people assembled in a corner of western Pennsylvania on Friday to say their final goodbyes to Corey Comparator, the father of two who was killed during the attempted assassination of former President Donald J. Trump last weekend. Donald Trump, writes Reuters, described on Thursday how he narrowly survived an attempt on his life, telling a rapt audience at the Republican National Convention in his first speech since the attack that he was only there by the grace of Almighty God. The former president struck an unusually conciliatory tone during the speech's opening moments when he formally accepted the Republican presidential nomination for the November 5th election, but he swiftly pivoted to well-worn attacks on the Biden administration, which he said was destroying the country. That was the article from Reuters. Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, spoke about the speech in an interview at the Aspen Security Forum in Colorado. Questioned by Ellen Nakashima, Washington Post national security reporter.
I was, expecting Donald Trump to give an acceptance speech that was more about unity and changing the tone. And while it started on a somewhat contemplative note about surviving last Saturday's assassination attempt, it quickly reverted to some more familiar Trump tone territory, being a little more divisive and demeaning, and recalling the Trump of 2016 and 2020. Senator Cornyn, as a potential next leader of Senate Republicans, I just was wondering what you thought of that speech and that tone, and does it help at all with the undecideds in your party? And then how do you think, did it do anything to reassure allies who might be nervous about what a potential return of Trump might mean in terms of a transactional approach to diplomacy and the erosion of democratic institutions and the moral authority of the U.S. on the global stage? Short question.
Thanks for the softball.
Right off the bat.
So, obviously, anytime you're speaking to a group, you consider the audience. And I think the audience there in Milwaukee expected President Trump to do exactly what he did. Obviously, the trauma of the near assassination was the top of mind. This was unfortunately, I think, a terrible failure by the Secret Service. But we'll have plenty of time to do an investigation and look at exactly what happened and what should have happened. But obviously, we would never want this to occur to any leader, any political leader in our country. But you're not going to change Donald Trump. And I think people get frustrated when they think all of a sudden he's going to wake up tomorrow and be something different than what he is. But I happen to believe that the 4 years that President Trump was in office were a good 4 years for the country. Chris Coons may disagree with me on that. I wish the president would talk more about the accomplishments of those 4 years, but you also have to consider the audience that was there. But in terms of the future, we'll see what happens on November the 5th. Again, I expect Chris and I have different hopes and wishes and dreams in terms of that outcome. But we have enormous challenges facing our country fiscally, from a national security standpoint. And the only way we're going to be able to solve these problems are working together to the extent we possibly can. That doesn't mean that occasionally we won't use the budget reconciliation to do things with the 51 vote majority rather than a 60 vote majority. But as you know, if you're going to do anything lasting, it has to be bipartisan. That's the fact of life. Some people in the Republican primary don't like that. They think, well, we ought to be able to get everything we want. But the fact of the matter is the world does not work that way. So I'm looking forward to the opportunities next year, but I don't want to understate the complexity and the gravity of what it is we're going to have to do. But I'm glad to know I've got friends and allies like Chris Coons and Dan Sullivan to do that with.
Great.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, interviewed by Ellen Nakashima, Washington Post national security reporter at the Aspen Security Forum in Colorado. The Republican ticket, Donald Trump, presidential nominee, and Senator J.D. Vance, vice presidential nominee, will campaign together for the first time on Saturday in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Live coverage at 5 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN television, streamed at cspan.org, and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The Biden-Harris reelection campaign putting out a statement today. Last night, the American people saw the same Donald Trump they rejected 4 years ago. For over 90 minutes, he focused on his own grievances with no plan to unite us and no plan to make life better for working people. He avoided mentioning his Project 2025 agenda, but still proudly flaunted the worst of MAGA extremism. Americans know exactly where he wants to take the country. They know that he inflicted pain and cruelty on the women of America by overturning Roe v. Wade. They know that he destroyed our economy once and will inflict pain on the middle class, and he wants to gut the checks and balances of our Constitution and rule as a dictator on day one. That was a statement from the Biden-Harris reelection campaign. A third Senate Democrat is now calling on President Joe Biden not to continue seeking the Democratic nomination for president this year. Martin Heinrich of New Mexico, who writes, while the decision to withdraw from the campaign is President Biden's alone, I believe it is in the best interests of our country for him to step aside. By passing the torch, he would secure his legacy as one of our nation's greatest leaders and allow us to unite behind a candidate who can best defeat Donald Trump and safeguard the future of our democracy. And several more House Democrats are calling today for President Joe Biden not to run for re-election, including Zoe Lofgren of California, Sean Casten of Illinois, Jim Costa of California, Greg Landsman of Ohio. That puts the count over 30 House Democrats calling for that. Biden-Harris campaign manager Jen Dillion was on MSNBC this morning.
Absolutely, the president's in this race. You've heard him say that time and time again. And I think we saw on display last night exactly why, because Donald Trump is not going to offer anything new to the American people. He's the same person he was in 2020. He's the same person he was at the debate stage. He's the same person he is that is about himself and not about the American people. And Joe Biden is more committed than ever to beat Donald Trump. And we believe on this campaign, we are built for the close election that we are in, and we see the path forward. The president is the leader of our campaign and of the country, and he is clearly, in our impression and what we've built and in our engagement with voters, he is the best person to take on Donald Trump and prosecute that case and present his vision versus what we saw last night.
So Jen, what do you say to Democrats who say he can't win and that there are better candidates that can go out there and beat Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, you know, I'm not here to say that this hasn't been a tough several weeks for the campaign. There's no doubt that it has been. And we've definitely seen some slippage in support, but it has been a small movement. And you know this, the reason is because so much of this race is hardened already. The American people know that the president is older. They see that. They knew that before the debate. Yes, of course, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are reassuring the American people that, yes, he's old, but he can do the job and he can win. And I think that that's really fundamentally what we're built for as a campaign. This entire campaign has been built for how close this race is going to be. It was close in 2020. It's going to be close in 2024. But what people know about the president is pretty hardened. And so for us, we know that people are not moving from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. What they're doing is they're saying to us, can he do it? And the president's saying, yes, I can. And they're moving to unsure, uncertain, because there's a lot of conversation, as you've already mentioned, that's happening right now. What's happening? What's not happening? He's absolutely in it. He's got to show that he is fighting for the American people. He's done that day in and day out since the debate. And he is also really holding the people that have been with him all along.
Jen Dillion, President Biden's campaign manager, on MSNBC. Congressman Adam Smith, a Democrat of Washington State, who has said President Biden should not be the Democratic presidential nominee this year, was also interviewed today on that cable network.
You were among the first lawmakers to call on the president to step aside. What specifically do you think merits the president of the United States of America, who received 14 million votes in the primaries, won nearly 3,900 delegates, not to run for re-election now?
Two things. One, what became clear in that debate and what we were worried about even before the debate and what has been even further clarified since the debate, the president is not capable of delivering the message in an effective way. And I don't see how anyone could debate that. There have been countless examples even since the debate that makes it clear that the president is struggling to run a schedule and be able to do interviews and give speeches and really prosecute the case against Donald Trump. If you watch that debate and you're a Democrat or you're just somebody who thinks Donald Trump doesn't belong back in the White House, you watch that debate and the guy on the stage, Joe Biden, he was your champion. He was the guy who was going to stand up to Donald Trump and stand up for the agenda that we want. And he could not do it. And it wasn't that difficult. Trump was lying constantly, leaving incredible openings that any average mediocre debater could have stepped in and used. The president couldn't do it. And since then, he has still struggled to do that. So that's number one. It is clear at this point that he cannot deliver that message. After that rambling, insane speech that Donald Trump gave last night, my goodness, if we just get a candidate who can stand up and deliver our message, we win. And number two, the questions about the president's health continue. I mean, you've seen the White House press briefing since that debate. That dominates the discussion. The White House has not been completely transparent about that situation. Those are all distractions from what this election should be about. It should be about the danger of Donald Trump and the promise of our political agenda on the Democratic side. As your reporter, as Ali mentioned just a moment ago, Joe Biden's done a great job as president. I want to deliver that message. I want someone at the top of the ticket who's going to deliver that message. And what we have learned is the president can't. As far as all those people who voted for him, as I say, go back, play that debate right before any of those 14 million people vote. And do you think they'd vote differently? I do. Circumstances have changed since those elections happened. Democratic Party has a process. We have delegates. We can nominate our candidate that we want. It doesn't have to be any one person. And I just implore our party to see this. And one final point, you give me a lot of time here, I respect that. If we are at this point in the campaign and the president is struggling to maintain Democrats on his side, if their argument is, well, we think we can get a majority of Democrats to be with us, at this point in the campaign, that answers the question. It is just not a viable campaign anymore, and we have better options. We need to take them.
Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington State, on MSNBC. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, who has said she supports President Biden's reelection, did an Instagram Live Thursday night, during which she said that many Democrats who want Joe Biden to drop out also don't want Vice President Kamala Harris on the ticket.
I don't think people understand what it takes in terms of running a presidential campaign. And I'm going to say what a lot of these folks aren't saying. I'm just going to say it. If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. And I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms. I see what they say in conversations. A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket. Am I here to guarantee that that is what is going to happen or that is what will happen? I can't tell you that because as we all know, politics is insane. Anyone who tells you 100% what's going to happen is lying to you or engaged in an enormous amount of hubris. I'm not here to tell you that if Joe Biden is the nominee, he's definitely going to win. But because I don't think if anybody is the nominee, we're definitely going to win. Okay? And I understand where we want to talk about hedging bets. But I do want you to know what gets uncorked. Because if you think that's going to be an easy transition, I'm here to tell you that a huge amount of the donor class and a huge amount of these elites and a huge amount of these folks in these rooms that I see that are pushing for President Biden to not be the nominee also are not interested in seeing the vice president being the nominee. Will they win out on that? I don't know, but I am here to tell you, do not take that for granted.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, on her Instagram Live Thursday night. NBC News writes, Democrats are in an unprecedented crisis over who should be their presidential candidate. But the party committee that governs the nominating process met Friday and proceeded as if everything was normal, and its entire plan was not at risk of being upended at any minute. As calls mount for President Joe Biden to step aside and let another Democrat lead the party into the November election against former President Donald Trump, the Democratic National Committee's Rules Committee held a virtual meeting where the message to delegates was essentially, everything is proceeding as planned. The meeting was convened to discuss plans for a virtual roll call to formally nominate Biden weeks before the convention, but no votes were taken or decisions made. Instead, party leaders used the meeting to inform the nearly 200 members of the committee about the process that is currently planned, which they had already laid out in a letter earlier this week. That was from NBC News. During this meeting, former White House counsel and 2020 Biden campaign counsel, Dana Remus, explained the issue is that states like Ohio require the Democratic nominee be named by a date earlier than the dates of this year's Democratic National Convention to get on the general election ballot.
In past cycles, Certain of these states accepted provisional certifications by the deadlines with the formal paperwork to follow following formal nomination. And certainly some states have indicated that they're still willing to do that today. But the problem is that unless a state law specifically states that a provisional certification is effective, and many state laws do not, we can and should expect a lawsuit from the Republican Party or from a conservative group challenging the certification. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, we have to assume that everything about the election process that Republicans and affiliated groups can challenge, they will challenge, no matter the strength of their arguments. We've already seen a wave of litigation this cycle, with the DNC involved in nearly 24 cases with the RNC and aligned groups. It's fresh, certainly in my memory, in 2020, when Donald Trump and the RNC filed nearly 70 post-election lawsuits challenging every aspect of the process. They've stated publicly their intent to bring even more litigation this time round, including where there's opportunity around ballot access.
Dina Remus, former White House counsel and former 2020 Biden presidential campaign counsel, at today's Democratic National Committee Rules and Bylaws virtual meeting. The NBC News article about this meeting has this paragraph: the committee will meet again on Friday, July 26th at noon to consider adopting the virtual roll call process, which would not be held until the first week of August. President Biden stayed in Delaware today as he recuperates from COVID-19. Dr. Kevin O'Connor, physician to the president, putting out a written statement. President Biden completed his 4th dose of Paxlovid this morning. His loose, non-productive cough and hoarseness continue to be his primary symptoms, but they have improved meaningfully from yesterday. His pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and temperature remain absolutely normal. His oxygen saturation continues to be excellent on room air. His lungs remain clear. The doctor also said the president continues to tolerate treatment well, and we will continue Paxlovid as planned. Washington Today continues in a moment.
As more people cancel cable TV, C-SPAN's funding is at risk. This summer, an anonymous donor has stepped up to help by matching all donations up to $25,000. I'm Caitlin with C-SPAN, and this means your gift will go twice as far. Your donation supports unfiltered access to government and public affairs programming, including the C-SPAN podcasts you value. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Every dollar helps us reach our $25,000 goal. Thank you for listening and supporting C-SPAN. Donate today at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. An article at the Wall Street Journal: Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter falsely accused by Russian authorities of spying, was sentenced to 16 years in a high-security penal colony after being wrongfully convicted in a hurried, secret trial that the U.S. government has condemned as a sham. The court's Friday verdict, after 3 days of hearings, was widely viewed as a foregone conclusion, since acquittals in Russian espionage trials are extremely rare. Gershkovich was afforded few of the protections normally accorded to defendants in the U.S. and other Western countries. The article from the Wall Street Journal. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was questioned about this by Mary Louise Kelly, NPR's All Things Considered co-host at the Aspen Security Forum.
I want to ask about Americans detained in Russia, including Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, who was sentenced this morning to 16 years in prison. Also, Vladimir Karamurza, who was awarded the Pulitzer Prize this year for his columns for the Washington Post. How do we bring them home?
I think you had Roger Carstens here a couple of days ago. Roger, his team, every single day are working to bring unjustly detained Americans home wherever they're held. And of course, when it comes to Evan, when it comes to Paul Whelan in Russia, other Americans, we're working it quite literally every day, looking to see what we can do to get them home. We've had a rather extraordinary track record over the last 3.5 years of doing just that, bringing some 30 Americans home from different places around the world where they were being unjustly detained. All I can tell you is this. We're working it. We're working it as we speak, and we're not going to stop until we get Evan home, we get Paul Whelan home, until we get others home.
Understanding and appreciating that you would not want to get into any details in a public forum of negotiations that may be underway. Is Putin, and many other bad actors in the world, but let's stick with Putin, is he just waiting out Biden? Like, why would he cut a deal on Evan Gershkovich now when it's such a huge bargaining chip for him with the next administration?
Well, you're right. I'm not going to get into the details. Look, any effort to bring any American home is going to be part of a process of back and forth, of discussion, potentially of negotiation. And depending on what the other side is looking for, they'll reach their own conclusions about whether it meets whatever their needs are, and we can bring someone home. And I don't think that's dependent on an election in the United States or anywhere else.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Aspen Security Forum in Aspen, Colorado. President Biden posting on X today, Evan Gershkovich received a sentence of 16 years in a Russian prison despite having committed no crime. I will not mince words. He was targeted by the Russian government because he's a journalist and an American. President also writing, I won't rest until Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan are in the arms of their families. From Fox News, the United Nations top court has ruled Israel's settlements in the Palestinian territories are illegal, and they must be removed immediately. The state of Israel is under the obligation to bring an end to its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territories as rapidly as possible, IJC President Nawaf Salam said when he delivered the court's findings on Friday, stressing that the continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is illegal. The opinion is merely advisory and is not legally binding. Reporting from Fox News. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be visiting Washington, D.C. next week, and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan talked about it in an interview with Dimitri Sevastopoulos, Financial Times U.S.-China correspondent at the Aspen Institute.
Let's talk about the Middle East and Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to Washington, I believe, on Monday. It's also no secret that his relationship with President Biden could be better. So what message is President Biden going to deliver to Bibi when they meet on Monday?
The overriding focus of the meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be about the ceasefire and hostage deal. Several weeks ago, the president went out and said to the world, there is a blueprint, a pathway to get the hostages home, a ceasefire in place, humanitarian assistance surged into Gaza, and then a platform to build greater peace and stability across the Middle East. That was at the end of May. Over the course of June, he built global support for that, getting UN Security Council endorsement, getting a G7 endorsement, getting the countries of the region to speak out on it, and securing Israel's commitment to it. We now also have Hamas's commitment to the broad framework the president laid out. But there are details to be worked through because this is a complicated piece of business to try to execute a ceasefire in a circumstance like this with respect to Israel's military presence, with respect to humanitarian assistance flows, and with respect to what the long-term disposition of the Gaza Strip is going to be. So the president will focus his energy with Prime Minister Netanyahu on what it is going to take, working together, the U.S. and Israel, and then the U.S. working with the other guarantors, the other mediators in this process to get this deal done in the coming weeks.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the Aspen Security Forum at the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado. What went wrong with the war in Afghanistan? The first line at an article at military.com. It goes on, it's a question that scholars, policymakers, service members, veterans, and everyday Americans have debated over the course of the 20-year conflict. A discourse that picked up significantly after the chaotic and unsuccessful end to the war in 2021. Now a congressionally chartered commission is seeking definitive answers. The Afghanistan War Commission, created by Congress shortly after the 2021 withdrawal, held its first public hearing Friday, formally kicking off its heavy undertaking of assessing the mistakes of America's longest war and providing recommendations to ensure leaders don't make the same mistakes in the future. That story from military.com. The co-chair of the commission, Shamila Chaudhry, opened the meeting in Washington, held at the VFW headquarters.
Today, we make history. There's no other way to say it. Never before has the United States commissioned such a wide-ranging and independent legislative assessment of its own decision-making in the aftermath of a conflict. The scope and the mandate are very ambitious, but the task is even more significant because it takes place in the immense shadow of all who sacrificed and served. Many of you are here today. To the hundreds and thousands of you, service members, diplomats, aid workers, intelligence officers, contractors, and volunteers, this commission honors your commitments to defend U.S. interests. Today, we also remember why the war began. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked our nation, compelling us to act to prevent another such tragedy. Many responded to the call to serve and defend our nation. Now our directive is to reflect, learn, and heal. I want to thank the members of Congress for their bipartisan support in establishing this commission. They have been at the forefront of this clarion call for understanding. Since convening less than a year ago, we have made significant progress. We've hired a professional staff. Today would not be possible without them. I want to thank them directly for their work. We've held regular meetings with scholars, with the Afghan American community, with veterans, and other stakeholders. We've also drafted a very impressive research plan that will answer the key questions that we all have about the war. And we've started the hard work of obtaining information from the executive branch, and we will continue to do so over the course of the next 2 years.
Afghanistan War Commission co-chair Shamila Chaudhry. She previously served in positions at the State Department and National Security Council, working on Afghan and Pakistani issues during the Obama administration. About this commission, Reuters reports the panel's first public hearing came just over a month before the third anniversary of the chaotic final U.S. troop withdrawal that ended America's longest war as the Taliban seized Kabul. The 16-member commission, which was set up more than 2 years ago but began work less than a year ago, is to deliver its report by August 2026. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Have a good night and weekend.